Welcome back, friends. We are now at the point in our consultation where we do the DMin showcase. This is an opportunity for doctoral candidates in our Doctor of Ministry program who are working specifically on projects, research projects related to or cognate to Black church studies, to present their research, what they're finding, and for us to ask some questions of them. So the first student that I'd like to introduce, the first candidate, is the Reverend Amy Stoker. Reverend Stoker grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. She graduated with an associate's degree from St. Thomas Aquinas Junior College in Nashville in 1985. In 1988, Reverend Stoker earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Communications and English Writing at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. After college, she worked in public relations at East Coast Entertainment, in public relations at the Jim Halsey Company on Music Row in Nashville. Another job in publicity at East Coast Entertainment took her to Richmond, Virginia in 1989. And it was in Richmond that she found the Presbyterian Church USA and discerned her call to ministry. She graduated with her Master of Divinity degree from Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia in May of 1995, and was ordained as a minister of Word and Sacrament in August 1995. Reverend Stoker has served churches in Rockville, Maryland, Albany, New York, Canton, Minnesota, and Shawnee, Oklahoma. In 2019, marriage to her supportive and sweet husband, Brent Stoker, and the call to serve First Presbyterian Church in Pulaski brought her back home to the state of Tennessee. She began her doctoral studies at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary in January of 2021. Reverend Stoker is the proud mother of two young adults, Phoebe and Zach Perkins, and the proud stepmother of Will, Carolyn, and Graham Stoker, as well as the proud mother-in-law and future mother-in-law to Adrian Stoker and Samantha McCoy. We are delighted to have you as our first DMin showcase candidate for this Black Church Studies consultation. The floor is yours for the next 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. C. Good afternoon. As you've heard, my name is Reverend Amy Bussey Stoker. I'm an ordained pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA, and I am the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Pulaski, Tennessee. And I am a candidate for the Doctor of Ministry at Louisville Presbyterian Seminary in the Advanced Practice of Ministry track. Can you see my screen? Okay, there it goes. As my title states, my research project is an exploratory phenomenological study on 3 white clergy women in the Presbytery of Middle Tennessee. Each woman in my study identifies as progressive, and they each serve churches that consider themselves to be progressive. The specific phenomenon that I am exploring is how white clergy women are socialized into whiteness and white supremacy. My theory that drives my research is the idea that white clergy women such as myself, who are educated, upper middle class, are preachers of the gospel and identify as progressive and liberal, that being progressive, whether you grew up in a progressive home or became progressive later in life, is not a safeguard against racism and white supremacy. Holding to progressive and liberal ideals in religion, politics, or other aspects of life is not enough. It posits that racism is out there somewhere to be combated, but not within here, within ourselves and our familial, sociological, and cultural DNA. So I'm exploring the socialization through a series of 5 narrative questionnaires that the women fill out and return to me electronically, and 5 one-on-one interviews with me based on Bobby Harrow's cycle of socialization and her subsequent cycle of liberation. Harrow cycles can be found in Readings for Diversity and Social Justice, which is what we refer to as the Green Reader. Next slide, please. Although my research is not autobiographical, nor is it autoethnographic, I am, as I said, a white progressive clergywoman serving a congregation in Middle Tennessee. And I too have been socialized into whiteness and white supremacy. I also once believed that being progressive and liberal negated any possibility of me being racist. So while I am focusing on the narratives and socialization of these three other clergy women, this work is deeply personal. And my endeavor to understand this phenomenon is as much about understanding myself as it is these other women. To that point, I think it's pertinent to offer a brief outline of my background. As Dr. Kauser said, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in a predominantly middle to upper middle class white neighborhood. However, I did not grow up in a traditional Southern home with deep Southern roots. My parents were transplants from the upper Midwest, another factor that I think my family believed counteracted the possibility that we could be racist. If racism was out there and about white and Black relations, then it did not exist in Minnesota, where at least one time, there was only a small population of African Americans. Racism, if it is defined in this narrow way, was limited to Southern white people. 1970, the year that I started kindergarten, was the first year that kindergarten was implemented in Nashville public schools. It was 13 years after what was known as the Nashville Plan for School Integration was proposed following the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education ruling in 1954. My kindergarten teacher was the first Black teacher in my elementary school, and there was only one Black student in my class. By first grade, the students in my class were almost evenly divided between Black and white. However, for the rest of my time in my elementary school, my teachers were white with one exception. And they were mostly white until I reached high school. Even then, though my high school was integrated, the teachers and the administration were still mostly white. I also attended neighborhood schools located no more than a mile or two from my home throughout my public education. The one exception to this was in 7th grade when I was bused to a school in North Nashville. North Nashville was a Black neighborhood, and at the prospect of busing, many of my white friends, including those who were from progressive liberal families, were pulled out of public school and sent to private school. But I stayed in public school and I was bused. This was the only year I was bused. Then I returned to neighborhood schools. Fast forward to young adulthood in the early and mid 1990s. After college, as it was said, I moved to Richmond, Virginia. After growing up Southern Baptist, I became a Presbyterian while I was living there. I joined a large, moderate to liberal church that was attuned to social justice and mission-minded, but was a white congregation located in a white neighborhood. I went to seminary in Richmond, and when I was ordained, I was called to serve churches around the country. Every church I have served, whether they were conservative, moderate, or leaning towards liberal, were white. Next slide, please. These next two slides are class pictures from my elementary school to show the difference from kindergarten to first grade. So this is my kindergarten picture, and I'm the one looking down at my feet in the front. Next slide, please. And then as you can see in first grade in 1971, we are much more evenly divided. I counted, and I think that there are 14 white kids and 13 Black kids. So as I said, we were fairly evenly divided by that time, but then I went back to having a white teacher. Next slide. Because my ministry site for my doctoral work is a presbytery rather than a church, I think it's important to have an outline of some of the history of racial justice initiatives of the Presbyterian Church. At the time of the Civil War, the denomination split over the issue of slavery into what is often referred to as the Northern and Southern churches. The two denominations did not reunite until 1983. In 1967, the year my parents moved our family to Nashville, the Northern Church adopted the Confession of 1967. And although it bears 1967 in its title, it took almost a decade of work and perseverance before it was officially adopted. It addressed the changes and upheavals in the United States at that time, specifically the need for the reconciling work of the gospel. It was the first confession to be adopted by the church in 3 centuries, and the first to specifically address racial reconciliation. The pushback against it was intense, with charges that it was a communist document. After reunification, other task forces were commissioned to study racial justice in the denomination. In 2004, the Task Force for the Study of Reparations included the Confession of Belhar in its final report to the General Assembly, which is our denomination's highest level of governance. It asked that presbyteries and the congregations within them study it for further discussion with the intent of adopting it for our Book of Confessions, which is part 1 of our Constitution. The Confession of Belhar comes out of the United Reformed Church in South Africa and apartheid. The overture to include it in our confessions failed to pass the first time before it went to the GA, the General Assembly, but it was presented again in 2016 and was adopted. The latest initiative in our denomination, which is proving to have momentum, is the Matthew 25 project to build congregational vitality, eradicate systemic poverty, and dismantle structural racism. Both presbyteries and congregations can vote to be Matthew 25 partners. The Presbytery of Middle Tennessee is a Matthew 25 mid-council. This means that we voted unanimously to be aligned with the goals of the Matthew 25 vision. I don't have an exact number of churches within the Presbytery at this time who have also voted to become Matthew 25 churches, but at the Presbytery level, a social justice committee has been formed as one response to the call of Matthew 25. And I will say that my church has not yet voted to become Matthew 25. In 2018, I was asked to serve on a special committee at the General Assembly level to address the problem of racism in the denomination and to hear and lift up the voices of those long silenced. The understanding of that last part is that those silenced voices were people of color throughout our denomination. Our committee was multiracial to intentionally represent the different voices and peoples we wanted to hear from. From the outset, we engaged in anti-racism training to understand anti-racism and prepare us for the mandate we'd been charged with more fully. A deeper understanding of anti-racism would shape the course of our work. Over the next 4 years, we came to some specific and disturbing realizations. First and foremost was what I have already pointed out. The PCUSA has voiced its intention to confront racism within the denomination many times. Next slide, please. But the voices that had been most silenced were those who have done this work in the past, had their reports accepted, adopted, most often unanimously, and still nothing has changed. In our report, we addressed the fundamental requirement for reparation, and we also called the denomination to accountability for perpetuating this cycle of what was often no more than performative justice. We also, in our work together, realized that reunification, as good as that sounded, presented many problems for people of color. They were left out of that conversation and the social justice work that needed to be done. And although the Confession of Belhar was a powerful step in a just direction to try and impose another country's and another denomination's confession from their context onto ours, is the embodiment of white supremacy and white privilege. So we've also asked the church to create a new confession of faith. It was my work on this committee that propelled me into my doctoral work and my specific research. You can have all the task forces and special committees that you want. You can write policy statements and adopt initiatives, but racism is a white person's problem. And until we white people, especially those of us who are progressive, can figure out how and why we are socialized into whiteness and white supremacy, we cannot adequately or fundamentally address racism, nor can we uproot it from ourselves, our churches and institutions, and other societal structures. Next slide, please. In the process of my work so far, I have gone from the big question of racism as out there to the personal questions of how I am racist and how I have been socialized into whiteness. For the majority of my life, I have identified as a progressive feminist. However, being progressive and a feminist was again not an inoculation against racism. These two identifiers did not teach me to ask critical questions of my own history. I have been proud that I was part of the history of integration in Nashville because I lived it. But I never asked why my schools were integrated, but not the neighborhood I lived in. I did not question why integration of schools mainly meant that children of color had to come to us and what that may have cost them in leaving their neighborhoods to come to ours emotionally, physically, and financially. I remember vividly to this day how long the bus ride was to North Nashville. It was long, but I only had 9 months of it compared to friends who did that for their entire time in public schools. I did not question the history of private schools in Nashville, many of which were formed as a response to the possibility of integration and busing. I benefited from integration. I loved and love being surrounded by people who are not like me. It has given great richness to my life. It expanded my vision and my understanding of the world. But no other part of my life has been as integrated as my schools were. What progressive feminism did not cause me to ask was why I was only required to go to a different part of the city for 1 year, yet for the rest of my education, it was the other way around. Now, this is only one aspect of my life that I'm just now questioning. Like so many feminists, I was oblivious to white feminism's racism. I assumed that all women, regardless of race, class, or creed, shared a common understanding of the world, hence the phrase universal sisterhood. Reading the scholarship of womanists and Black feminists such as Dolores Williams, Bell Hooks, Wilda C. Gaffney, Renita Weems, and Nyasha Jr., and their critiques of white feminism has helped me to feel the proverbial log in my own eye, specifically when it relates to issues of power, the abuse of it, and the imbalance of it. Still to this day, in groups that include both white women and women of color, white women still assume the responsibilities of leadership and authority are theirs to share or not. And learning from the scholarship of white scholars such as Jennifer Harvey, who wrote Dear White Christians, and Susan Thistlethwaite, who is a white feminist, as well as intersectional theologians such as Grace Ji-Soon Kim and Susan M. Shaw, have contributed to my understanding of how whiteness is designed to be invisible. It is the water we swim in and the air that we breathe. Reading Robert P. Jones' book, White Too Long, was critical to my understanding of how the contemporary mainline denominations still perpetuate and preach what he calls slave religion. And as I stated at the beginning of this slide, white progressivism does not equal anti-racism. Next slide, please. So this leads me to my research question. What effect, if any, will questionnaires and interviews organized around cycles of socialization into white supremacy, white privilege, and anti-Black animus have in raising critical self-reflection and critical self-awareness on their own racial histories among 3 white progressive PCUSA clergywomen in the Presbytery of Middle Tennessee? Next slide, please. And then following my research question is my research hypothesis. The 5 interviews and questionnaires that deeply interrogate the cycles of socialization into whiteness and white supremacy will raise the 3 white PCUSA clergywomen in the Presbytery of Middle Tennessee's critical self-reflection and critical self-awareness about their own racial histories of privilege and supremacy, and the inherent bias that comes with this socialization. This deep self-knowledge will motivate the women to take the work of anti-racism further into their churches and into the Presbytery of Middle Tennessee. Next slide, please. I apologize for the faintness of these graphics, but as I said, my questionnaires, both narrative and semi-structured, are based on Bobby Harrow's cycle of socialization and cycle of liberation. And the cycle of socialization evolves in phases, beginning with the first socialization, cultural and institutional socialization, enforcements, and results. If this cycle of socialization is not interrupted in some way, it continues to cycle and evolve from generation to generation. Next slide, please. So too, the cycle of liberation occurs when that cycle of socialization is interrupted. Its phases are waking up, getting ready, reaching out, building community, coalescing, creating change, and maintaining. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you just a brief example of some of the questions that I have created that are based on these cycles. These are some sample questions from my narrative questionnaires. The first 4 questionnaires come from the first 4 phases of the cycle of socialization. And the last questionnaire comes from the cycle of liberation, specifically waking up. So you can see in these questions that under first socialization, what are the races of the 2 people who birthed you as best you know? What was the majority race of students in your school or schools? That is a big one. Enforcements, did you have Black families or other people of color in your congregations when you were growing up? The results, what does whiteness mean to you? And then changing direction and liberation, was there a critical incident in your life that made you think differently about racism or whiteness? Next slide, please. So too are my interview questions. These are the interviews that I do one-on-one with my participants. They're structured in the same way, and I use the responses that I receive in my narrative questionnaires to guide my interview questions. These are some sample questions for my interviews. So what was the predominant race of your neighbors? What messages about race did you receive from church? Tell me about relationships that you had with Black people or other people of color when you were at school. How have you benefited from the color of your skin? And tell me how you've changed in your understanding of racism and what it's done in the course of your life. Next slide, please. What have I learned so far? I am only 2 sets of questionnaires and interviews into my research at this point. But all 3 of my participants have willingly shared some very deep personal stories, as well as told me that these interviews are bringing up more questions for them each time that we've had a chance to talk. They said, this has made me think about this and this and this, and it brings up memories and it brings up connections that they probably hadn't made before or had not made in a long time. One of my participants also grew up in Nashville, and she is 10 years ahead of me in age and schooling. So she was in high school when integration of teachers and then the next year of students began to happen. She grew up in West Nashville in a predominantly white neighborhood, new neighborhood at that time, definitely upper middle class. And she remembers realizing with some shock that the Black students, because their only mode of transportation was the school bus, were effectively excluded from after school and extracurricular activities, except for some sports. She also realized that although it was the norm for her mother and other mothers in her neighborhood to be stay-at-home moms, the Black students that she went to school with had families where both parents worked. And we may think of that as the norm today, but at that time, having the mother solely staying at home was a function of white supremacy and certainly contributed to one of the many big blind spots in white feminism. And one other observation that she shared from that time was that she had disposable income as a teenager. She had an allowance, whereas the Black students that she knew did not. And she pointed out to me that she now realizes that assuming that there will be disposable income is an accessory of whiteness and white privilege. And certainly this intersects with class as well. And when she said that, I had not considered that either. So that was revelatory for me. Each of my participants were taught at both home and in church that you are to be kind to others. If there was an 11th commandment in my family, it was thou shalt be nice. And that there is no difference between people. But just as in my circumstance, deeper, more critical questions about race and class were not asked or considered. As the researcher, I cannot help but identify commonalities between the socialization of my participants and myself. Their socialization has been my socialization. It remains to be seen if my hypothesis will be proven true, and that doing this work will result in the lifelong work of anti-racism in their own lives and in their churches, as well as in mine. But I am hopeful. I am hopeful that this is only the beginning. That is the end of my presentations. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this and for your time and attention. And I will do my best to answer any questions that you have.
Amy, this is Dr. Cowser. What is your hunch? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I know I'm frozen on screen. Can you hear me?
I can. The screen is turning green right now.
Okay.
What is your hunch around what effect in the final analysis these rounds of introspective interviews will have in translating into these women doing anti-racism work in the Presbytery or in their churches?
My hunch is that it's going to take some time before it translates from inner work to outer work. But I do think, from what they're telling me so far, Dr. Cowser, that this is opening their eyes and hearts in ways that they had not considered before. Again, as I said earlier, their connections and remembering things that they had not perhaps remembered in a long time. And so my hunch is that it will have an impact on the Presbytery. I hope that it will have an impact on their congregations. It's hard to know how to measure that or how long that will take. Can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
What is your sense, Reverend Stoker, of the impact so far of these questions on the women themselves, their families? What impact is this having on them?
I think it's a heart impact, and I that sounds presumptuous on my part, and maybe pretentious too, but I do think, from what they're telling me, we've only done 2 courses of this, that they feel like they're revealing things that they hadn't expected to reveal, and it feels, so far it feels safe for them and for me. That I think that they're I think that it's rending their hearts to think about what comes from the prophet Joel. It's certainly rending mine.
Okay, Amy, there's a question in the chat from Donna Phillips. When you attended schools with Black children, how often did they share their stories with you and vice versa? If there was a mutual sharing of stories, how did it affect your consciousness about race?
That is an excellent question. I'm trying to think. I don't think we would have shared stories particularly, and maybe in high school, when I had some very close Black friends in high school. What I remember about early elementary school is that it was with the Black girls that I felt most loved and that I fit in with better than I did with my white peers. I know that in high school, we had conversations about race, but whether it was personal stories or not, I don't think that happened much in high school. I think it wasn't until college and seminary, especially seminary, that I began to have those kinds of conversations with women of color and with other people of color. But it's certainly, hearing stories has certainly affected my perspective on my own life and on the world that I grew up in.
Question before we get to Reverend Holladay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I see. I'm sorry. I saw one more question. Do I have time to answer that?
Yeah.
There's someone, Dr. Loretta Vega asked, did you or your participants have any Black friends?
I definitely did and do. Very close friends. So far, 2 of my participants did not. One did, but it was later in her life. They didn't have close friends when they were younger. I don't know as much in their adulthood if they did. I don't think any of us realized just how white our realities were until we started looking at these questions.
Amy, this is the last question from Dr. Kauser. Can you share what you're learning with your congregation?
I think in small groups I can. I have invited my session several times to be in conversation with me about my work, and they have shown very little interest in it, which is a sad thing for me because I'd like to share this with them. My hope is beyond this research to do create a Bible study or a curriculum of some kind.
Yes.
Based on this, and to
Yes.
create, to help with the creation of racial audits, which the special committee that I was on has encouraged congregations and presbyteries to do.
Yes.
I think I'll have better opportunities to share it within the presbytery.
And do you think you'll share your findings in Presbytery once you've defended?
I hope so. Yes, that's my goal.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. This is, as Dr. McIntosh and others have said, this is outstanding work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for an outstanding presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Now ready to introduce the Reverend Emily Holladay. She is our second DMin Showcase candidate. Reverend Emily Holladay currently serves as the pastor of Village Baptist Church in Bowie, Maryland. She is part of the 2021 Louisville Presbyterian Seminary Doctor of Ministry cohort and is a candidate for graduation in the fall of 2023. Reverend Holladay is also a graduate of Mercer University's McAfee School of Theology, where she received her Master's of Divinity degree and studied Christian social ethics. Reverend Holladay is originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and is generally a very loyal University of Louisville sports fan, although she writes that the men's basketball team is trying her patience this year. Reverend Holladay has taught as an adjunct professor in the religion department at Simmons College of Kentucky and has served on the staff of many Louisville area churches. Reverend Holladay is married to Scott, and together they have a 3.5-year-old named Franklin, wonderful 3-year-old named Franklin, who has become the mascot of the 2021 online DMin class. Reverend Holladay, we are eager to welcome you to the DMin Showcase and to hear your research and findings. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kauser, and thank you to each of you for participating in this. I am grateful to be able to share my Doctor of Ministry work with you. One caveat before I begin, I'm in the very beginning stages of research. My project was approved just this past January, so I am just in the beginning stages, but excited to share with you where I am and what I'm learning. And so my research project is called A Case Study of Village Baptist Church in Transition Towards Embracing Beloved Community. We can go to the next slide. I'll tell you a little bit about my church. Village Baptist Church is a cooperative Baptist fellowship congregation of about 150 members located in Bowie, Maryland. You may not be familiar with Bowie, Maryland. It's a suburb of Washington, D.C. And Village Baptist Church was founded in 1968 as a house church in the Pointer Ridge neighborhood of Bowie, and that was approximately 10 years after Levitt and Sons developed the city into a suburban community of affordable housing for white families with working connections to Washington, D.C. Today, Bowie is the largest municipality in Prince George's County and the most affluent, predominantly Black city in the United States. Over the course of the last 20 years, Village Baptist Church's demographics have also shifted from solely white membership to a nearly 50-50 split between white and Black church members. Active members and participants in Village Baptist are primarily from European, African, and Caribbean descent, a number of whom are first or second generation American. And most church members are from middle class or upper middle class families with college educations and connections to the federal government, NASA, or the military. That's generally what brings people to this area. The most recent previous white male pastor served the congregation for 33 years before retirement in 2017. Can move to the next slide. So the research problem that I am seeking to address through this project is that the structures of congregational life at Village Baptist do not reflect the 50-50 Black-white congregational makeup. Because Village Baptist was founded by all white families and the membership remained predominantly white for most of its history, the systems and structures of congregational life inevitably center the narratives and styles of white people. As the community around the church became more racially diverse, the congregation also made active attempts to welcome more Black church members and visitors and is now one of the few 50-50 white-Black religious communities in the city. So that means it's one of the few religious communities that actually reflect the makeup of the city where it's located, which we celebrate. Over the course of this transition, however, the leadership, worship styles, and operational systems of the church have remained the same, meaning they've remained predominantly white. And this is a problem because the church's lived reality then does not reflect their theological commitments and stated priorities. Very early in the church's history, remember it was founded in 1968, they made a statement against efforts to continue segregation in the community and in the country and established the motto, "We reserve the right to accept everyone." BBC aspired to create an environment modeled after the life and teachings of Jesus, in which all who entered and engaged with the congregation felt that they could participate fully in the life of the congregation and would be embraced as nothing less than beloved children of God. And so the problem here, though, is that when systems and structures of congregational life do not reflect the community in and around the congregation, creating this type of environment is not possible. In the same way that the church is recognizing that the motto is problematic due to the assertion that acceptance is the role of white people towards minority people, our church is also wrestling with how to nurture a model of community in which all voices are represented fully in the life of the congregation, and Black and white congregants are embraced in the fullness of who they are. So my study is seeking to employ community organizing principles and practices at Village Baptist Church over the course of the next 6 months or so in order to develop a mission, vision, and value statement that reflects the beloved community priorities and to relationally build an action plan for beginning to implement the mission, vision, and value statement across all areas of congregational life. I believe that the consequence of not doing this work is that the church will allow the supremacy of whiteness to prevail. Worshiping and serving in such environments can be destructive to both white and Black Christians' identity as people made in the image of God, which then would perpetuate this supremacy of whiteness by keeping white and Black Christians from claiming their power together to enact justice and follow Christ's calling for the congregation and the community. This is an initiative, this is work that our church has been eager to do, recognizing that we have been in a process or in a need to intentionally listen to one another and to grow. And so this is, I feel like, the right time and the right place to try to do this work. We don't have a lot of churches that represent this type of diversity and can be able to intentionally engage one another. And so I'm grateful to be in a community where not only this work is necessary, but the work is encouraged and wanted. So we can go to the next slide. The purpose of the study is going to be, as I said, to create a new beloved community mission, vision, and value statement that inspires an action plan for beginning to implement the mission and vision value statements across all areas of congregational life to reflect the 50-50 Black-white reality at Village Baptist Church. And so my research questions are, what effect, if any, will the use of community organizing principles and practices, such as a reading, research, and action team, relational meetings, and house meetings, have in creating a beloved community mission, vision, and value statement at Village Baptist Church? And what effect, if any, will the use of community organizing principles and practices have in creating an action plan to begin implementing the beloved community mission, vision, and value statement across all areas of church life? We can move to the next slide, please. My working hypothesis, beloved community can only exist when every person shares power and all members of the community work towards justice, equality, and love of all persons created in the image of God. Community organizing principles and practices, including relational meetings, house meetings, and a reading, research, and action team, will help break down the cycle of socialization by exposing implicit and explicit racism, power, and bias structures guiding the leadership of the church. And more specifically, my first working hypothesis is that using community organizing principles and practices will allow the congregation to identify its mission, vision, and values through relational leadership that engages the voices and input of each person invested in Village Baptist Church, including the community surrounding the church. And my second hypothesis is that using community organizing principles and practices will allow the congregation to identify succinct and tangible guideposts that align with the church's desire to reflect and embrace the 50-50 reality at Village Baptist Church. Organizing tools will help reimagine the church structures and operations by engaging the cycle of liberation through building open and authentic avenues for relational power and systems of accountability. This process will result in an action plan that addresses each aspect of church life to reflect the 50-50 reality, identifies priority areas for execution, and provide accountability for future growth and change. The sincere and thoughtful engagement with church members and active attenders will also help increase buy-in to bring the mission, vision, and value statement to life beyond the scope of this project. We can move to the next slide. I wanted to provide a few key terms as well, key concepts. Community organizing, for one, is the work of leveraging the assets of the congregation and community for the purpose of common action towards the betterment of the community. According to Robert Linthicum, the iron rule of organizing is never do for others what they can do for themselves. And so organizers enter a community not to catalog a litany of the community's deficits, but to identify and train leaders. A fundamental assumption of organizing is that every community has within it leaders capable of acting on their own behalf in relationship with others. The goal of organizing is to find and cultivate those leaders. And then the term beloved community. I know that you have probably heard that phrase in a million different settings. It has come into popularity again recently after being a term popularized by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. Our church has created its own definition for beloved community based off of Dr. King's definition. And so we have a shortened definition, which I'll share with you today, and then a longer definition. But our short definition is that at Village Baptist Church, we understand beloved community to mean putting love into action and pursuing justice in our everyday living, striving through our work to build authentic relationships through listening to and learning from one another and the community around us. Of course, Dr. King believed that if we lived into this ideal beloved community, that racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice would be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. And love and trust would triumph over fear and hatred, and peace and justice would prevail over war and military conflict. So it's our hope that our work of beloved community, and becoming and investing in beloved community would help to transform our community as a church and beyond the four walls of our congregation as well. The cycle of socialization, which you heard Reverend Amy Stoker talk about in her project, was introduced by Bobby Harrow and says that we are each born into a specific set of social identities related to categories of differences, and these social identities predispose us to unequal roles in the dynamic system of oppression. And so then we're socialized by powerful sources in our world, starting from our families and moving on to institutions and systems, to play roles that have been prescribed for us by an inequitable social system. And so our roles today are either to continue that cycle or to choose to exit the cycle by challenging the system. And that's what we hope to do through this beloved community work. We can move to the next slide. So the community organizing principles and practices that I'm engaging are, one, a beloved community team. One thing that Robert Linthicum says, who wrote the book Transforming Power, which has been instrumental to my work and my research, he says that an action team is pivotal to the work of community organizing, and that this action team, he calls it a reading, research, and action team, which is a group that is meant to help to do the research and groundwork necessary to prepare for action in its area of concern, and then to manage and coordinate the efforts of the organization to carry out actions. Now, the beloved community team, for the purposes of my research, will not be doing any actual hands-on research with this project, because I am the primary researcher. But hopefully what we do through our work together is to lay the groundwork for what is to come beyond the scope of this project. So how do we engage church members so that they can take on this work of community organizing beyond the scope of my project and beyond the scope of my own leadership? How does this become part of the ethos of who we are so that we continue the work? And so right now, the beloved community team consists of 8 church members representing a cross section of the community, with an even distribution of Black and white church members, members who have been at the church for more than 20 years and less than 20 years, and members serving in various leadership roles. They have also been through facilitator training in the past, led by a consultant for the Center for Congregational Health. And so they're a group that's been active beyond the scope of this project and will continue to be active afterwards. Together, we are reading Transforming Power by Robert Linthicum and learning more about community organizing, both scripturally and the practical application of that. And then they are going to be participating in relational meetings with me and also serving as an advisory team. So as I am pulling data and analyzing it, I will present to them initially my findings, not raw data, but overarching themes that I see, and asking them for their feedback as a group before heading to the congregation. The congregational questionnaire is another piece that I'll be doing and have actually already started. So that's the one place where I've already started. And it has been disseminated to the congregation, and its purpose is to define the demographic makeup of the congregation, identifying how people are engaging with the church, and gaining a better understanding of how the practices of the church are or are not currently aligned with the stated goal of being a beloved community. And for the purposes of the questionnaire, a congregant is being defined as any active participant in the life of Village Baptist Church, whether they are a formal member or not. So far, my goal is to get at least 60 responses to the questionnaire, which would represent the majority of the people who attend worship in person at least once a month. And some of the information gained in the questionnaire, it's both a written interview style questionnaire and also a demographic style questionnaire. Some of the answers and responses from that will be used to help going forward with, especially with the house meetings and how those are structured. Relational meetings are according to community organizer Michael Geekin, by far the most important, effective, and least used organizational tool in congregational life today. And so the relational meetings are one-on-one meetings that will be held with the beloved community team and other leaders in the congregation that may be identified as people who I might speak one-on-one with. But they are in-person meetings unless schedules do not permit, and they will be recorded and transcribed for data analysis, but they're asking team members to reflect on their experience within the church, what things bring them joy, what things are frustrating, and identifying common areas where we feel we have needs that need to be met. And so those relational meetings will be starting soon, and the findings will be presented to the congregation and the beloved community team. The house meetings are, according to Robert Linthicum, the purpose of house meetings are to build solidarity and community together in small groups, small enough to fit comfortably in someone's living room. And so I will be holding 3 to 4 house meetings and bringing people together to discuss most likely key themes related to different ministry areas, but some of that is going to be based on what highlights or what themes come out of the congregational questionnaire. At least one of the meetings will be an open invitation to give any congregant who desires to participate an avenue to contribute, but at least another 1 or 2 of those meetings will be with a specific leadership group, such as the Worship and Music Commission or the Church Council. We can move to the next slide. Okay, what I'm learning right now about research, first of all, is the difficulty of being a researcher and a pastor. It was not apparent to me when I first started just how difficult it would be to try to be in both shoes, to try to care about how the research is going to be understood by the congregant, to make sure that everyone feels like their voice is heard as a pastor who loves and cares about each person, and to also be a researcher who knows that the goal is to get the research done in a timely manner. And so, making sure that I can do that within certain parameters. So while as a pastor, it might be in my heart to sit down and have a relational meeting with every single church member, and that may happen over the course of my time, it won't happen over the course of this particular research project. So what I'm learning about research just in this short time I've been doing this is just how difficult it is for me to sometimes think with my head as a researcher and let my heart stop for just a minute so that I can take on that one lens, but then also to let my heart help to identify what is the most important thing in this research and how to care for. That's a big piece of the research, is caring for the people who are participating, because it is uncomfortable, and it can take a lot out of people to provide just even the responses to a congregational questionnaire, but especially to relational meetings and house meetings. And so how do I create an environment where they feel safe? For myself, I also set learning goals that I want to learn how to name internalized whiteness for myself. And I want to become a stronger leader and learn how to use relational power. And I want to lead my church to do the same thing. So when I think about what I'm learning related to myself and what I'm learning related to the church, there's some similarities there. I'm learning that the church seeks relational leadership, but also says things like, well, we want you to set our vision. And so how do I do that in such a way that setting the vision involves involves the church, and so that they can come alongside and really have ownership in who we are and the direction that we're moving. And so that is my presentation. You can go to the last slide, which just says questions, comments. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to address those now.
Emily, this is Dr. Kauser. Have you started your reading, research, and action team work? I think you said no.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we have. We've started reading Linthicum's book. We're going about a chapter a month. So this month we'll be reading the chapter on Nehemiah and the iron rule of power.
How is that going for them? And how is it going for you reading it now a second time?
We have gotten some really good conversation out of reading it. I wish that we had even more time to work through it together, because we're reading it and discussing it as a part of our regular meetings. And so I think we are going to try to do, like we've talked about, doing a visit to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and then doing some time to talk afterwards about it. And so you know, I may have some time to set aside to do, like, let's just talk about what we're learning in this book and not try to do everything else that we're doing at the same time. They asked some theological questions about particularly like some of the biblical chapters early on that challenged me as a pastor, that I was like, I don't know the answer to that. And so it's been fun to learn and engage together, and to be able to engage our frustrations with the ways that the world has turned out so differently from the way that God had created things to be. I see one question that says, how receptive is the congregation to new leadership? I think they're becoming more and more receptive as our work continues. And so the more, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted this project to be about listening and learning was that we have seen in the past, just in the past couple of years, how having listening sessions has shifted people's responses even towards our beloved community work from why do we need to do this to, oh, I understand now why we need to do this work, and you know, what can we do to be better, or to, you know, to minimize the pain that we, especially as white people, are causing, and that sort of thing. So I think we're growing, and that's good. Like I didn't ever expect that we would be, you know, okay, right this minute we're receptive and we're ready to go. But my hope was that we could grow through this project. And then how did I get their buy-in to this project? Really, because I started from where we were as a congregation. So we had already started work called the Beloved Community Initiative prior to me starting my Doctor of Ministry project. And so I said from the beginning, I would like to pick up where we are and let this Doctor of Ministry work be something that can contribute to where we're trying to be. And I think a lot came to the front, particularly as the country was struggling, or is still struggling during the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. There was a real strong sense in our congregation that we were failing one another in our lack of response to that. And so then we wanted to do the work. And so the buy-in, I think, was already there because I said from the beginning, I'm going to pick up where we are and keep us going, keep us moving forward. And my real hope with this work, and especially with using the community organizing principles and practices, is that I'm giving them practices that they can and that we can use beyond the scope of this project, that can become a part of who we are as a congregation. Because needs like this, problems like this, they're not just going to end just because we did this one project together. Like, we're going to continue having things that we need to address. And if we have structures for doing that and ways that we're actively doing it, it's not going to be or I hope we're not going to be as much reactionary to what's going on as we are really visionary, living into a transformed way of being as a community. And oh yes, I am the only pastor at the church. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, benefits beyond the church. I do. I especially have been talking with my denomination, because the denomination has been growing, which is great. And the fastest growing areas for our denomination are in what they're calling the Pan-Africa Koinonia and the La Familia, which is a Latino Baptist group. And so, I think this is going to be something our denomination is going to need to work on, or already needs to work on, is how do we become not just a, denomination with white people over here, Black people over here, and Latino people over here. How do we really embrace the diversity? And so I've been, sharing with my denomination this work, and hopefully it can be something that contributes to the denomination, learning more about how to embrace who we are now and address the systems that maybe are keeping us from really being the full body that we're hoping to be, as opposed to, separated groups within one body.
Reverend Emily, this is excellent research. We know you're still in the early phase 1, phase 2 of your research, but what you've presented even so far augurs well, I think, for hope to use these tools and practices to really make substantial progress at Bowie Church and towards the beloved community that King lived and died for on this side of glory. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn this back over to Reverend Dr. Marion Miller, who will close us out. Thank you.
First of all, I too would like to thank all of you for the wonderful participation we had today on the Black Studies consultation. I especially want to take time to thank the 2 DMin showcases. A lot of hard work has gone forth, and thank you for sharing with us. And for all of those who participated in the breakout sessions, don't forget those were recorded. So if you'd like to partake in another one, they will be made available to you. And the wonderful plenary sessions that kicked off the sessions this morning with Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Greer. Now, tomorrow's planning, we will also do another plenary session, and it will start promptly at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there bright and early. Now, before we go, please join me in a closing prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather for this year's Black Studies consultation. Be with us as we leave today's session Help us to walk with confidence and lead us with your truth as we move forward to live each of our lives in a different way. Forgive us, oh God, for the hard work that was done in each of these sessions. We know all the credit goes to you. We confess that honoring you through our work is not always at the forefront of our minds as we strive for the end goal. So in the spaces of our hearts, we prayerfully honor you, oh God, and we give you praise. The church doesn't stand on any one person's shoulder. Not one of us can further your plan for us on our own, but it's together as a community we can complement each other's strength. Black Studies Consultation is a unified body focused on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Together we can do great things in your honor, as you have already purposed us to do. So we thank you once again for the presenters, as you have spoke life into our hearts today, and for the courage of each voice that was heard. May we continue to strive for your will day by day, for it is in the power of the Holy Spirit that we pray. Amen.